Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about My Hero Academia chapter 278. As you can see, it's a different environment. This is the first time I'm sitting down to work on YouTube, is what I would have said. If I sound a little bit annoyed, it's because I'm recording this video for the second time. Friends, if you have OBS, make sure you're not recording to the MP4 format, as eventually you will have a situation where the MP4 file will corrupt. It's just not worth it. Anyway, everyone, thanks for being here. We're going to talk about the chapter. I got general notes. I got my actual notes that I have written up here. On the first recording, it was only 25 minutes, so I'm going to try and get back to 25 minutes. I don't know. The first round of commentary was really good. I came up with a lot of ad-lib stuff, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to replicate it, so it sucks. But hey, I hope you're having a good day. So let's start off. I only have one bit of general note for the beginning of the video. That is, I want to talk about Midnight. So for this chapter, I went back to chapter 263 to see what I thought about what was going on with Midnight, because when I got into this chapter, I wasn't surprised that she had such a prominent moment. When I went back to chapter 263, the epitome of my thoughts for that particular chapter was that I was wondering if the author had plans for her. So let's just very quickly listen in on what I had to say at that point in time. So I do want to see what the author wants to do with her. If she's going to carry any kind of weight towards these fights. Is she going to go on any kind of speeches when she's fighting someone? Now, she wasn't in the main fight group, so maybe she'll be facing off with someone that hasn't arrived on the scene yet. So, you know, there's one thing to say that maybe she's going to be fighting with someone that hasn't shown up on the scene. It's another thing to say that she's going to end up trying to stop Gigantomachia of all people. So really, when it came down to this chapter for me, you know, there's to some degree, I was prepared for Midnight having her moment, but having her moment off the heels of Gigantomachia's rampage, that was a surprise. So props to the author. I didn't think that's where she was going to be used, but I do like what ultimately happened here. I really think that when it comes to the build-up for Midnight, I think this is all really consistent. I think Midnight's particular, it's not like it's not like the biggest character arc in the world. It's not the biggest character exposition bit either, but it was solid. It was really solid. This is one of those chapters where I would recommend, you know, just go back to chapter 263, just reread Midnight's dialogues, because Midnight's dialogues lead into her words in this particular chapter. 263 informs you on her perspective in 278. That's what I would say. Now, I still think that there's a few avenues that you can explore with Midnight. For instance, she did set up one last thing, that being thinking of someone that you move forward for. So it's a situation where I would like to see that particular rhetoric explored. I would like to see more from Midnight, but we'll talk more about that later on in one of her panels. Anyway, that's the big general note I had for the chapter. Just I'm really happy with what the author did with Midnight. I'm really happy that he was able to give her time. And yeah, it's really solid. Consistency is really the name of the game for this particular chapter. So with that out of the way, guys, let's just get into page 1. And man, I hope this recording goes through. So page 1. And of course, I have my notes here in front of me. The most valuable things, the sidekicks go on ahead, leaving the kids. That just says that the kids are going to be by themselves for a little bit. We have the group back of Kaminari, Mudman, and Mushroom Girl. And we have Mineta reacting to Jiro saying that something huge is coming. And also for this page, we had really good face shots for Jiro, really expressionate. On the page 2 and 3 spread, we have an update on the villains, and this is the scene that validates my concerns about who Shigaraki was referring to when he said others back in chapter 273. This page does confirm that Shigaraki did in fact establish a preferred group or a hierarchy, and he conveyed that to Gigantomachia. Skeptic's line, I think, are there specifically to point out how strange it is that only he got picked up. Also, Dobby in this page sets himself up for later with his keep quiet line to get the heroes by surprise. Page 4 to 5, we have Giganto being excited for his master, and honestly, it's kind of endearing to see him just shouting yay. It's kind of cool. Anyway, it's nice to see that he's ecstatic that he got called. But oh man, there is a line that I just want to rip apart, and that is the line that goes, "The team in Jaku must have failed." And you didn't plan for that, guys. You didn't plan for the possibility that maybe the other team would run into difficulties. You didn't plan for the possibility that maybe you didn't know what was going on, or that you missed a crucial detail, or that maybe there was more tricks up the villain's sleeves. You all made a terrible assumption. I know I went on a little rant last week, but it's like there's limited information and there's limited information transmission because Hawks has to get things out in code. So who knows how much stuff has to get lost to make the code work. Anyway, the point is, the heroes had this coming, man. Like, someone should have been better at drafting a contingency plan. They should have had more contingency plans. I sincerely hope that this becomes something that Hero Society looks back on and they're like, you know, next time we should probably plan for the possibility of failure, or maybe for just the possibility of villains being a little bit more tenacious than we expected. And the thing is, you know, I want to be fair to the heroes here. This is an unprecedented situation. Hero Society, the way it is right now, is still relatively young. You know, this is one of those situations where you could say you have to fail in order to know what you can do better. Because usually if you haven't failed, it's going to be kind of hard to quantify just in what ways you can actually fail. And in this case, I do hope that they go back to the drawing board and they realize they need to have better operation management, or like some kind of better planner at the head of these kind of things. Now, I do want to say, the author putting in that line where the heroes are saying that they assumed that Giganto wasn't going to be moving, he's doing that because he has to just remind people what perspective the heroes were coming in here. The fact that you have someone having the time to say that as they chase after Giganto is really just there to again illustrate the perspective that the heroes had. The reality is, you shouldn't be making excuses for the hero when you come out of this. They made an assumption. And you know what they say about assumptions? You make an assumption and you make an ass of you and me. And that's exactly what the heroes did here. What I'm going to be looking for in the future is whether or not the author is going to address this. Because honestly, when it comes to a story, you're going to get more drama if people make faulty assumptions. That's the unfortunate truth. A lot of stories rely on someone making a faulty assumption for the things to get worse. So this is why it's a little bit tricky for whether or not the heroes are going to reflect on this. Like, if we get a note on it, that would be very nice. But for now, this might be just an unfortunate trapping of the story format. Anyway, on page 5, we have a cool Cementos page. It just looks pretty badass. I don't see anything really of value on this particular page aside from the visuals. On page 6, we have the Redestro edge shot conflict, and we see Cementos in the background, which gives us some local data. We know where we are. One cool thing is that we see Redestro putting 2 and 2 together and realizing that Shigaraki has been woken up ahead of schedule. So it's actually really neat to have that whole thing and see Redestro get worked up for Shigaraki's sake. You know, we know that he's a zealot at this point, but it's kind of cool to see it. On page 7, we have a shot of Redestro's blast, and in it we can see the Fat Gum group. I think it's cool that Fat Gum protected kind of the sidekick and protected Tamaki. You can see that he has his arms stretched out. In this shot, we can also see that there are a few people on the ground, so that's a little bit unfortunate. The next important shot in this page is that we see 2 of the advisors running after Giganto. One of them also seems to have a puppet-like body, which really reminds me of the puppet users from Naruto, but it was kind of interesting to see that. Now, I do have a thought that pops up when you see this. I'm wondering, if people show up to where Shigaraki is and they do not show up on Giganto's back, in other words, they weren't people that Shigaraki specifically refers to as others, I wonder if Shigaraki is just going to dust them right there. Like, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Shigaraki gets rid of people he doesn't want, just flat out. That makes sense for who Shigaraki is at this moment in time. We'll have to see, but if I was to put my bets on it, I would bet that Shigaraki gets rid of a lot of the people. I wouldn't be surprised if Shigaraki cuts off the extra fat from his organization. Even though I think it'd be better for him to have more people rather than just a few, because like in the few there's Dobby, and you know, like, do you really want to rely on Dobby by himself? Not really. Page 8 and 9, brutal page. Absolutely painful to see Mount Lady get flung by her leg. Smart on Makia, though, to go for the point provoking the most resistance. And I liked what the author did with showing Kamui Woods seeing the initial grab, and then on the other page, page 10, reacting to that brutal toss. The change from observation to full-out panic and concern was really, really good, especially when you consider that Kamui Woods wears a mask. So the author had to convey that with just the eyes, and I think he did a really good job on that particular front. On page 10, we just have a valuable page telling us what are the consequences if the heroes fail here, that being that the town that's near the mansion is going to be in trouble. And for this one, unfortunately, I think the heroes probably will fail a little bit. You know, if I was to say percentage-wise, I feel like it's 80% sure that the heroes are going to fail in this overall. Just because there's a lot of spots here that can go really wrong, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. But this sucks. It's a nasty situation. I mean, I'm all for the heroes winning out on this one, but just there's too many things at play here, and there's too many variables. On page 11, this page and page 12 really make the perfect story of who Dobby is and what Dobby does. Like, he's a guy that looks impressive at first, but then he completely fails on the follow through. Like, yes, Dobby did really good by getting a sneak attack in. He is totally validated when he said, hey, we should be quiet. But he's too overconfident. He could stand with not talking so much and not getting a big head, and instead keeping his eyes on the target. He's, you know, like, he's not a good enough character to be a one and done fighter. Now, we all know the joke. I'm really aggressive with Dobby, but you know, you gotta give props to the author, because when you see this here in Dobby's consistent. This is like 100% consistent Dobby. And the reality is, if Compress had been with Dobby when he was trying to burn the birds, you know, the birds might actually have died. Similar to what happened with Snatch. As far as I'm concerned, seeing this now, I have to say, like, Dobby only kills people when Compress is involved. Also, for this page, it was cool to see Compress's balls hitting Midnight's face. On page 12, you have Compress giving Dobby the lesson. Don't underestimate heroes. If only Mr. Compress knew. Underestimation of the heroes is all Dobby ever does. Anyway, the other interesting thing on page 12 is that of all people, it's Majestic that gets name dropped. That is so interesting. What's going on? Think like the author. Why name drop one of the few characters that we only know by name for sure? Now, one possibility is that the author name drops Majestic because she was about to think about Momo, and Majestic and Momo are linked. But the other possibility may be that Majestic is going to have a more pronounced role. The reason I say this is because it seems that the author is putting more effort into Majestic's design. And let me explain. Momo is the only Class 1A character that did not have her mentor shown in chapter 256, and also before in the work-study double spread. Contrast this to Ojiro and Sato, who, in spite of working with a mentor that we didn't know of before, still had the mentor showing up during the work-study exposition and on the 256 page. When you consider that, this is ridiculously suspicious. When this kind of stuff happens, it's because the author hasn't yet narrowed down a design for Majestic. At that point, you have to ask, why was Majestic important enough to require extra thought? Given the way that the author is going about this, it may be because the author knew that Majestic was going to play a role here, and maybe the reason the design needed to be fine-tuned was because he wanted something that was reasonable to draw. And of course, if you recall, I think we've already seen Majestic, but the design itself isn't confirmed. Anyway, with Momo taking the lead here, it wouldn't be strange for Momo to have a quick Majestic flashback or have him support her in this particular confrontation. Regardless, when Midnight brings him up, it may be that the author wants to remind us that Majestic exists, and with her pointing out his quirk, maybe it's just a quick way of saying that Majestic is the kind of person that could deal with troublesome villains, because Giganto right now is a troublesome villain. Anyway, Majestic is the magic hero, so really sounds like there could be a lot of things going on. If we're assuming that we've already seen Majestic, we know that his power lets him float on rings or something? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, page 13, we have Midnight following up from her chapter 263 comment, specifically the one where she said that the adults don't have what it takes. So this just reconfirms that they're helpless, and you can tell that what she's doing is something that she wanted to avoid. She didn't want to have to bring the kids in here. So when she says that we're just helpless, she's really, I think, kind of chewing herself up given what she said in chapter 263. On page 14, we can see that Midnight called on the frequency for the kids that were in the woods. In other words, all the kids on this team heard Midnight's message. The reason that's kind of important because you see it later, but it also helps solidify the structure or the hierarchy of leadership. So if Midnight's telling the people that Creaty takes the lead, they're all gonna listen, and there's gonna be minimal friction. The other most interesting thing, aside from someone with possibly a gas mask going up against Midnight in this particular page is that trank bombs seem to be regulated. So at that point, my question is, Midnight also puts people to sleep. So is her sleep gas regulated as well? Honestly, that line of it's breaking the law is a really weird detail to put in at this point in time. But I have an idea for why that's happening. If you think about it, sleep bombs trivialize a lot of the confrontations in Hero Academia. If Momo could sleep bomb the villains during the unforeseen simulation joint or whatever that thing is called, that would have been a lot easier than just having to fight them. You know, make some gas masks, give it to the people, sleep bomb everything. If Momo sleep bombed the forest, that might also have trivialized a lot of things. A lot of confrontations are trivialized by sleeping agents. So I think the author, like, in a way, is putting that there specifically to justify why Momo wouldn't have used sleep bombs before. And that makes sense because Momo's also the one who's the most conscious about her power's effect on society. Anyway, on page 14, we have the Momo development arc continuing as Midnight gets attacked by the gas mask guy. And this is legitimately concerning because he has a mask. But Midnight probably has experience fighting people that counter her. So I really, really hope she pulls through. Like, if we're going to have more Midnight, I'm really hoping that we get to see her continue the character work that she started up. Like I said, maybe revealing who it is that she thinks about when she's going into battle. Maybe it's Aizawa and Present Mike. That would be really nice. But honestly, like I was saying at the beginning, you know, this was good enough. If the author wants to leave Midnight because he doesn't have any more time to showcase Midnight's character, really, I'm happy. He's already done enough with the character. I don't expect a lot from the side characters like Midnight. So anything extra that we get here would be just icing on the cake. I do want to say, it's also possible that because Midnight invoked Majestic's name, Majestic might be the one that comes in to save Midnight from these people if she starts having struggles. Which might be cool to see. And maybe it'll be Majestic, since Majestic was able to carry... Well, if we're assuming the one design that we saw in that previous chapter was Majestic, if Majestic is able to float people up into the air, maybe we'll see Midnight trying to trank Gigantomachia in the case that Momo's plan fails. Now, one last thing I want to note is that on page 15, Midnight still gave Momo a way out, and that's really consistent with what Midnight's character was doing here. So again, props to the author for keeping Midnight so consistent. On page 16, you have Momo thinking about what to do as we have shots of heroes trying to hold back the oncoming waves of liberators. There is one more important thing across page 16 and 17, that being that Kaminari had more of a presence on this page than he really should have. But I want to say, when you have Kaminari asking what happened to Midnight, that makes sense because Midnight was the one who pushed him forward. Midnight was the one who motivated him. So it makes sense that Kaminari would be the student most concerned with Midnight at this present moment in time, which just again reaffirms that the author was really consistent with what he was doing between this chapter and chapter 257, I believe. So again, props to the author. On page 17, we have Momo giving out orders, and at this time I will question, was it a good idea to have Momo being the leader for this group? I think so. Like, the reality is, she's the only one that actually has the sheer computational ability to process the changing variables in the battlefield well enough. But this is still a scary situation. We have to hope that Momo learned enough from Majestic to be able to predict and act efficiently enough to get through this with minimal casualties. Now, Momo's computational ability is there for her memorization and regurgitation of the formulas that she has to use in order to make her objects. But hopefully she'll be able to apply that computational ability to a quickly changing battlefield. On page 18, you have Mount Lady and Kamui Woods buying time for the kids. And I gotta say, I feel super bad for Mount Lady here. Like, man, guys, she's crying. Like, it sucks, man. Like, they're really trying hard. And Kamui Woods is also doing pretty great considering he was turned into a human bonfire. So again, you know, another moment of Dobby, you suck. And another moment of Dobby, the heroes are more persistent than you give them credit for. Anyway, on page 19, we have the kids agreeing to work with Momo as she produces some strange substance. And of course, on this page, the ones I'm most interested in are Kirishima and Mina, and the author was nice enough to put them in the same panel. I'm very curious. As you know, I'm kind of hoping that we're going to get some kind of some kind of personal interaction between those two and Gigantomachia. You know, really fingers crossed. I'm still betting on Gigantomachia being Crimson Riot. So it would be really neat. It'd be really neat if we get something out of that. At the very bare minimum, hopefully there's some kind of recognition from Kirishima and Ashido. At the best case scenario, This is just the startup for the Crimson Riot is Gigantomachia reveal. And that is the end of the chapter as Momo gets ready to fight the enemy and the kids get ready to get involved. So as we go into the future, you know, this is legitimately scary. Just looking at Makia, if Makia has a quirk that stops drug effects, then this is going to be really bad because then the tranks aren't going to be working. Like if I was all for one, I would not want a creature that could be stopped by poison or substances. I want a creature that stops when I say to stop, more or less. Is there a quirk that lets that happen? Maybe. You don't know. You don't know what kind of quirks Gigantomachia has in his back pocket. We know he has multiple quirks. God knows what they are. Like, maybe Machia also has a habit of just, like, injecting himself with rattlesnake venom in the woods. And just, you know, maybe that's how he gets his shits and giggles. Maybe he just develops an immunity to stuff like that. You never really know. So here's hoping that the sleep effects work. But at the end of the day, I see the villains showing up with Shigaraki. So if the author is able to avoid that ultimate conclusion, then props to him, because that's where I think this is all going to end up. But otherwise, it's gonna be tough. I really feel that this is going to be another one of those moments where Momo does things well on a technical level, but she doesn't do them well enough that she can clinch the victory. And really, the only other time she's done this has been during the Class 1A, Class 1B fight. So really, she doesn't have a precedence for failure. It's just, this is a situation where you could see Makia ultimately getting out of this because Makia is an unknown quantity. Still, you know, I hope that Momo, being the canon girl, she is able to launch some kind of sleep trank into Makia. It penetrates his skin and gets into his system. I really hope that we win out here. Do I have anything else to say for the chapter? Nah, it's ultimately a super consistent chapter. I'm really excited to see what this team can do. But, you know, worst case scenario is that this is just all a display of technical skill with no victory coming for it, and that would be unfortunate. Anyway, guys, let's hope that this recording worked this time. I hope you guys get to see this video. Thank you so much for watching. That's the end of the video. Let me know if I missed something down below, and until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.